Hi, everybody. We're delighted to be joined today by Hayley Ramjattan, specialist neuromuscular physiotherapist from Oxford, who is sharing her presentation on myasthenia gravis in children and focusing on exercise, education, and well-being. Hayley, over to you.
Oh, thanks, Sarah. Hi everyone. I'm going to talk specifically about myasthenia gravis in children. And with a background of physio, I'm going to try and touch on some points around how we can look at exercising safely, what maybe parameters or support we might want to think about around education and looking after our own and our child's well-being kind of within this. So if I click forward to the next slide. Perfect. Just to center us to what we're talking about today. So, we're talking about myasthenia gravis, and really, there are some fantastic talks on Myaware from consultants about how myasthenia affects us, and I just really kind of want to keep it quite broad and talk about things around, the perhaps the signs and symptoms that we might see. So, things like difficulty breathing, we might see sort of facial weakness, we might have droopy eyelids. We might get kind of weakness around the neck or specific muscle groups, might have difficulty with chewing. And these are the ways myasthenia can affect us, either from a really mild symptom or to perhaps a more severe symptom that might lead us to be in like a myasthenic crisis. So I'm kind of thinking about that whole spectrum and where kind of exercise, well-being, pacing, and looking after ourselves within that, we can kind of look at those tips and those ways of kind of moving forwards. So one of the words that often gets bandied around in clinic, and you might hear it, is the word fatigue. Now, fatigue is a absolutely huge word. If you ever were to go onto Google and type it in, it would give you probably 20 different definitions that include, sort of sense of well-being fatigue, the fatigue that you get when you're doing a task repeatedly, the fatigue that you might get when, you're reading a book that you're a bit bored with. So it comes in many forms: mental fatigue, physical fatigue. What I really kind of want us to think about, and there are many factors that can feed into it, right? So we've got, if we are a bit deconditioned and we've got some muscle wasting, we're likely to experience more fatigue. If we've got other comorbidities that lead us to be perhaps a bit low in mood or things that might actually kind of slow us down a little bit more, that might us feel a bit more fatigued. And all these things we might have had, a myasthenic crisis, or myasthenia might not be so well controlled. We might be feeling low mood. That can definitely make us feel more fatigued. And all these things kind of feed into each other and affect our quality of life and affect kind of where that balance is, how fatigue feels. And really, kind of what I want to talk about today is we've got fatigue on one side, which is that big term. And that's really the subjective sensation of feeling exhausted. That's kind of when I go, oh, how are you feeling today, Sarah? And she goes, hey, I'm really fatigued. I've had a really long day. That's fatigue. Then there's muscle fatigability. And this is like the objective change that we see in muscle performance when we do an activity over and over again. And that's myasthenic fatigue. So you might, it's really hard to kind of pull those two apart, but it's the myasthenic fatigue, which is the thing that I really kind of want us to think about, because those are the strategies and those are things that we can put in place. And those are the things where medication can affect it, and heat and activity can really affect it. So muscle fatigability, where you're doing an activity on repeat, and therefore what happens because of your myasthenia, you see a kind of drop in performance. You see that muscle not be able to kind of repeat that activity at the same level over and over again. And what can happen when we have fatigue is we can have a really good day. So our myasthenia is really well controlled, and we go, happy days, great. I'm going to go out and do every activity I possibly want to do today. I want to go to the park. I want to see my friends. I'm going to do all the PE at school. I'm going to walk to school. I'm going to get home. I'm going to do everything. And then the next day we go, yeah, I may have done too much. And we get this kind of bust. So we get this boom where we do everything. And then we have a bad day the next day. And then what happens is it takes us to recover back up to get a good day again. And then we might go, oh, I'm going to do as much as I can again. And then what we see is we see that bust. And we have this kind of boom bust cycle. What can happen with that is that over time, we see things gradually get worse. And that's why if your physio or your doctor ever talks to you about trying to avoid a boom bust model, is because we know that over time, if we don't kind of stop that, it actually spirals into a bit of a circle. So we go up and down, and actually the thresholds between a good day and a bad day just get smaller and smaller. So we want to really kind of think about pacing ourselves and making sure that we're not getting that kind of boom bust approach. And so when we think about fatigue, and I think about, well, where can we insert physio into the patient's journey? We've got several points on that journey that we need to think about. And so right at the start, if your child was right at the beginning of your journey, where your child might be acutely unwell, what are the things that we're thinking about? Well, in that moment, I'm absolutely not thinking, well, I want to, take your child for a run and do lots of physical activity and make them stronger. No, no, no. My focus in that moment is managing their fatigue. It's about if perhaps they were unwell and they were critically unwell and they were in hospital, it would be about ensuring that we're managing their joint range. If they're spending a lot of time in bed, that they're not getting tight in muscle groups. It's about thinking about not deconditioning those muscles. So, they're very fatigued. There's that word again. The doctors are giving them medication, but they're not well enough yet to perhaps be running around and doing loads of activity. Well, if them lying in bed means that they're not using their muscles at all, there's a risk of deconditioning. And so what can happen is that baseline that then, the physio's coming and trying to get your child up and going, that baseline could be lower than perhaps it needs to be. So thinking about deconditioning, thinking about what's important to the child, what's important to you as a family, and setting maybe some really functional goals. So that could be eating your own lunch or getting to the toilet or getting yourself dressed. So thinking about those things and just being mindful of the treatment side effects within that. So, if we have children who are in an acute crisis, sometimes they're having medication like steroids, for example, that can lead to weight gain. And just being mindful of that. If we've got a child that's not moving much, we're giving them steroids, we are at risk of adding on extra calories that maybe we're not necessarily needing. And then again, that has potential to kind of have an impact on what's the baseline that we're recovering from this acute crisis. And then we have this point where, the doctors have been amazing, they've put the right medication in place, and things are improving. And we're starting to look at, okay, where are rehab goals? Where are we going to in this point of our child's journey? And we're perhaps relearning some skills that we lost. And those might be, if they're really young and they were gaining motor skills and they were already starting to learn new motor skills, so they just learned how to walk in the last few months, that might be a skill that we need to go back and relearn because it's not in that long-term motor memory just yet. It might be about how we can increase that activity safely. So not getting into that boom bust. How are we managing that we're on an improving journey and we want to tick that along and not go, oh, everything's great, we've had a really good day today, and then almost tip it over the edge and have to kind of take 3 steps back and start again. So it's about being really aware of those early signs of fatigue, knowing, and as parents, you often really know your children very well, knowing your child, knowing what are those symptoms, what are those signs. Their eyelids often a bit more droopy when they're really feeling fatigued. Maybe their speech gets a bit more slurred. Maybe if they're younger, they're drooling a bit more, than you would normally expect. Those things that might say, oh, we're tipping it a bit far. We're going into the bus territory here. And how do we titrate those exercises? And then we've got the point in the journey where we're absolutely thriving, right? So we've got really good medication on board, we're stable, things are improving and we're ticking along. And we're looking at integration back into education, back into picking up hobbies. And what can be really important, really crucial at this time is how we educate the child, how we educate maybe their peers, depending on their age, and how we educate teachers or adults around them that might be supporting them on what has the journey been to now? What are the important signs and symptoms and things to watch out for so that we can help pace and manage things? And so that they are just as aware, right? Children are often not as good as adults at pacing activities. When they can do something, they do it 100%. And when they can't, they just don't. And so that boom bust can actually be much more common in children than we see in adults. So thinking about goal setting, thinking about having some parameters there where perhaps other people are able to influence them and gear them, maybe we won't do a whole hour of PE today. Maybe we'll do half an hour because we notice that fatigue set in. And so those are almost those kind of three stepping stones where we're kind of ensuring that we keep activity going. We're not doing this kind of boom bust journey. We're thinking about how we're pacing, and we're just kind of mindful of where we are in our journey. And what's important to remember in that is that there are occasions where we can have a step back in that journey. So no recovery is completely linear. You don't just get better at the same point every day and it just goes in a straight line, yes, to, perfection. It's a wobbly line, and sometimes it loops back on itself, and sometimes you can have an infection. We sometimes see when children go through puberty that can have an impact on how their myasthenia affects them. And sometimes we have to just reset those goals and go, okay, we were thriving and that was great, but we've had a little setback. We just need to, perhaps think about our pacing again, maybe readjust where our goals are, and thinking about how we can do activity safely. And that's where the professionals around you, your physio can be really beneficial. The consultants can help with that, maybe a specialist nurse, and they can just help with resetting those goals and giving you those clues and those parameters about how to manage that. One of the questions I get asked all the time is, can I exercise with myasthenia? And look, there's not huge wonderful evidence out there, that no one's done a big systematic review with 1,000 patients. What there are is quite a lot of sort of single case study reports. And what comes through for most of the literature that's out there is that when you have myasthenia, that is well managed, so we're not in a crisis situation and it's well managed, that exercise, graded exercise, is safe and beneficial. And graded exercise, that's a term that feeds into that, not boom, it's the avoidance of that boom bust, not getting into that. So we're doing something, we're seeing how our body responds to it, we're thinking, okay, that was perfect, maybe that was too much, maybe that wasn't enough and I could have pushed myself a bit more. And then titrating that up or titrating it down, depending on how things are going. But exercise is safe and it's incredibly beneficial. And actually, avoidance of activity can be very detrimental. We get that deconditioning, we get that weight gain. And those, all the wonderful endorphins that get released when you're doing activity, the integrating with your peers, the getting back into sport, the things, if you had a child that was really active and very sporty, that might be something that they hold really dear. And getting back to that is important. And so it's just being mindful of how we do it. But yes, it absolutely is something that we should be doing. There is a wealth of evidence out there on why exercise is important. This is not specific to myasthenia, but absolutely doing activity has so many benefits. It helps improve our cardiovascular fitness, joint flexibility, our balance and coordination, our motor skill development. For children, it's really critical that they are getting that motor memory and that development of their coordination. It sets up really good habits for life. And we know that children who are active are often then active as adults. And that's just a really important thing to kind of hold in your head. If you can keep your child doing activity or doing I don't like the word exercise actually, because exercise feels like something your physio's given you to do, and no one wants to be told by a physio what to do. It's boring. But if you can find activity that you enjoy and you can sustain it, you're much more likely as an adult to want to do it. It's much more likely to be something you go to when you want to have a bit of downtime or you want to interact with people. So we are setting up those good habits for life. It's important for independence and function. It's important for weight management. And that kind of self-confidence and that peer support of, either playing a sport or just, knocking a ball about with some friends, being able to go out and walk and be active with your friends. Those things are really important. And what it can do is reduce our risk of muscle fatigability. If we have a good, strong muscle underneath, when we are targeting that neuromuscular junction and the doctors are working on that with medication, we then don't have a deconditioned muscle. We have a muscle that's ready to respond to that. And that's really important. We can reduce our post-exercise fatigue because our body's much more ready and able to recover and respond to activity. We can have a really positive impact on our what we call activities of daily living. The activities you want to do each day, getting up, going to school, getting yourself dressed, meeting up with friends. And we can have a positive impact on that myalgia, so that muscle soreness that often comes on when we do exercise. And you'll know it yourself if you haven't done exercise for weeks and you decide, oh, that's a really fantastic run that I'm going to try and do. You're often really sore after it because you just haven't done it. And that's normal. That's normal myalgia. And that can put people off. So if we're doing exercise regularly, even if it's at a low level and we're gradually grading it up, we can have a really positive impact on that. So it is good, it is important, it is safe, but you just need to kind of get perhaps the right guidance around it. This is kind of a throwaway slide, which I often use as a visualization in clinic. And I'll say to people, okay, your body is like a car. And unfortunately, with your myasthenia, what's happened is myasthenia are the brakes on the wheels. And so the brakes are not working very well. Um, and we're trying to tackle that, and we're trying to sort out your brakes and maybe put some new oil on it, and we're trying to sort that out from a medical point of view. But if we can ensure that the rest of the car is as tip top as it can be, if we can make sure it's got the right fuel, so you're having a good diet, if we can make sure that you've got the best tires on board, so your muscles are good and strong, if we can make sure that we drive it properly, we don't race off and then try and brake really quickly, where we get that boom bust, we actually are more likely, even though those brakes don't work brilliantly, to be able to drive that car safely and effectively. And so it's perhaps a silly analogy, but I use it a lot in clinic, and it seems to kind of give you that sense of there are so many other bits that we can tackle and we can work on, even whilst the myasthenia underneath perhaps is kind of needing a little bit of extra support. And then when we talk about activity, I always come back to we need to put the child right in the center of this and find out what activities are important to them, because there is almost zero benefit to me saying, I'm going to give you 10 squats and, do 10 burpees and run up and down, if actually what's really important to you is being able to pick up your pen and draw or paint or write, because that is an activity that's so crucial to you, and that's a thing that's been affected because of your myasthenia. So we have to first understand what's important, what activities are important to you, and then work back from, okay, so what are the challenges to you achieving those, and what things do we need to put in place to achieve that, and then setting realistic goals about how we can get there. And that could be a number of different things. It can be your arms, your legs, your neck strength, it could be your core, it could be your posture. It can just be that confidence. Maybe you've had a bit of a confidence knock from your myasthenia and you need a little bit of support in going, no, you can do this. I can see that you've got the strength to do it. And we need to just perhaps adjust the way that we're doing it a little bit. One of the other analogies, I'm going to throw a few in here because one of them will stick, is the battery on a phone. I'm sure you've all done it, where you've got your phone, it's fully charged, and you've used it all day long and it's been going off, and you get to the point where it's critical. It's coming up with a little red line and it's saying, you need to charge your phone now or it's about to shut down. And typically at that point you're on a train and there's no charger and your phone shuts off. And then what actually happens in that moment is you have to charge it, and you have to wait until it gets back up to, at least a few bars before you can even make another phone call. That's just another way of thinking about that boom bust, right? If we can stop at the point here, where it's at about 50%, 60%, and go, oh, I know I've got a whole evening of phone calls that I've got to make. I might want to recharge my phone up at this point. And you are then in a much better position to be able to use your phone all evening than hope, oh, well, I'll just keep going until it dies. And then halfway through a phone call, you're not able to kind of continue. So it's, again, just thinking about that kind of, where are those signs? How do I get in there just before that point where it's becoming critical, and recharge and reboost myself? Another analogy, or I'll talk about it in a minute. So education is really critical for us making sure that school understand what it is that we're putting in place. So pacing in school can be tricky, but if I often find that if education understand what it is that we're trying to address, they're much better at putting things in. So they might be able to put in a different timetable. They might be able to build in breaks, rest breaks in the day. They might be able to slightly modify their lessons. So if everyone's doing cross country, is that something your child needs to do? Or could they do a half of it or a part of it or not none of it at all and do a different activity? Could we think about the environment that they're going into? So maybe modifying the environment. So thinking about classroom access. Are they being asked to do 3 lessons? One's at the top of 3 flights of stairs, the next one's at the bottom, the next one's across the building. By the time we get to the 3rd lesson, we're exhausted because we spent all of our energy getting up and down the stairs, and therefore we don't really have much left to concentrate in the class. So thinking about where's the classroom placed? Is there any way of moving some of those lessons downstairs, even for a temporary period? Thinking about the position in class, and it's something that's often overlooked. You might think that a child wants to sit closer to the front of the class because they're closer to the teacher. And actually, if you really think about having droopy eyelids or having a weak neck, going from your desk where your book is up to a whiteboard, back down to your desk, up to a whiteboard, you're doing a lot of repetitive movement. And then if you've got ptosis, you're perhaps even having to tilt your head back a bit further. Well, sitting back at the back of the classroom, maybe with a sloping board, can be helpful. You're not having to move your head up and down quite so much to engage with the lesson. Can some of the writing, some of the paperwork already be written, pre-written, printed out? So that's not something you're having to spend time doing. Can we think about having the right seat for you? You have to work really hard if you're this, lady sitting in a chair that's far too big for her and she's not able to put her feet on the floor. You have to really work your core and maybe, cross your legs to give yourself stability. So having an appropriate chair where your feet can sit on the floor and you're not having to work so hard to even just sit comfortably, those things can have a really big impact. And it's that cumulative effect of having to do those things. So this was the other analogy that I really resonates with people when we talk about it, and it's those bags of energy. Adults tend to talk about spoons. I find children respond really well to coins. And if you look at the top line, we've got this kind of 1 to 12, right? And what would happen is if I took your average day and I split them into coins of energy. So each one of these things takes me a coin, and I've got a pot of 10 coins to get me through my day. Well, washing and dressing in the morning might use up 2 coins because it's really effortful. It takes me a coin to walk to school. It takes me another coin because I've got 3 lessons that are upstairs. I use 2 coins to do PE. I want to do an after school club. The end of the day actually takes me 2 coins to walk home because my house is at the top of the hill. And then I've got homework to do. I've used all 10 coins up, and actually I don't have any coins left to do a bit of family time, maybe see a friend or get myself washed and dressed for bed in the evening. And so I'm in a boom or bust. I can either borrow some coins from tomorrow, in which case I've only got 8 coins tomorrow, and I have to understand that I won't be able to do 10 coins of activity, let alone 12, or I have to find a different way of taking some of those things out of my day, which allows me to do all those activities. So I might be assisted to get washed and dressed in the morning. I might walk to school, but I might actually get a lift home from school. I might do modified PE, so I don't do a whole hour. I might just have 1 lesson upstairs rather than 3. And that then allows me to have perhaps a bit more family time and maybe some more time to do other things like see friends or do a different after school club. So it's just being mindful of how you're using them. It's avoiding that boom bust. It's thinking about what have I got in the tank? How much am I planning on using? And if I'm using more than I've got in the tank, I'm borrowing from tomorrow, and tomorrow is going to be tough. And I need to bear that in mind. Muscular Dystrophy UK is a charity who actually have a really good document on fatigue management for people with neuromuscular conditions. And I'd encourage you to perhaps have a look at it. It is a little bit adult focused, but for teenage children, it can have some really good things in there. And it covers that, remember right at the beginning of this talk, we talked about fatigue being so many different things. It covers all of those parts. So how your fatigue can be affected by your medication, for example, really, really important thing within myasthenia, but how it can be affected by having a sedentary lifestyle, how hormonal changes can affect your fatigue, how stress, anxiety, those things can have an effect, how if you're not sleeping well can have an effect on it. And it's a great document. It's got lots of bits of information to it, and it's free to download if you ever want to go and have a look. It's a really good resource. A couple of things we talk about when we look at in clinic is about having those internal and external factors that can influence your fatigue, your weakness. And the internal factors are the things that you can control, and the external things are the things that you can't control, and being mindful of that. So the things that you control might be your well-being, your mental health, your physical health, your diet, your weight, exercise and activity, your medication, whether you're taking it consistently, how you're taking it, and your own internal expectations about yourself. Those are absolutely things that are well within your control to influence how you're managing your condition. The external things, I mean, as much as we think we can in Britain, we cannot control the weather. We talk about it a lot. We can't control the temperature. We can't control hormonal changes as we go through puberty. And we absolutely cannot control the expectations of others on us. And that's just really important to be aware. So although somebody else might think, oh, you can absolutely do this, well, that's great. You might think I can do that. Do I know my body? Do I understand my body? Have I had the right education about what it is that I can do? And how am I going to manage that and manage my own expectations? And within that, thinking about your own mindfulness. And mindfulness is this wonderful word which gets bounded around quite a bit. And it means different things for different people. And I think that's also important to remember. So, Sarah and I might have really different visions of what mindfulness looks like. For some people I know, mindfulness is going on a shopping spree. That's the least mindful thing I could do in my life. For me, it's perhaps having a swim. It could be taking the dog for a walk. It could be just doing some arts and crafts and painting. It could be sitting having, a cup of tea. So it's thinking about what is important to you. Those opportunities to just have a bit of downtime and do something. And then you can see within that, I've put exercise because actually exercise is something that can bring you mindfulness at the same time. So a couple of the key things just to kind of touch on is listening to your child, watching for their triggers. A really good way of doing that is keeping a bit of a diary. So knowing, we did go to the zoo yesterday and then they were flat out the next day and maybe we overdid it. And then thinking about how we can pace that. So could we have done half of the zoo? Could we have got a buggy for part of it? Could we not have walked there, maybe taken the car? What would have allowed us to enjoy that activity without using so many coins from that bag? So we avoid that boom and bust. It is important to just reiterate the exercise. Graded exercise is safe and it should be encouraged and you should get guidance on it. And have links in with your specialist team. So your therapist, education, make sure that you're getting that support so that you are able to do things safely. And that's it. Hope you enjoy it.
Thanks so much, Hayley. There was a lot in there. That's amazing. I think there's a lot for people to think about. I like the holistic approach and the analogies too with the visuals are always helpful, I think, and maybe not only just to the kids group for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the practical tips too. Just thinking about the bigger picture and possibly things on their own that wouldn't necessarily make the difference, but when you put everything together, then you might see better results. So I think there's a lot in there, and hopefully that will be really helpful to people. I'm sure that it will. Thank you so much for your time and enjoy the swim that I think that you've possibly got lined up and your bit of mindfulness. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sarah.